Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining today's program Between Memory and Image. My name is Anna Saygı, and I am the director of Slash. Slash is a nonprofit art space located in Dagpatch neighborhood of San Francisco on the unceded land of Ramaytush Ohlone people. Before we start, I'd like to mention that live captioning is available, and you can enable it by clicking on the closed captions, the CC sign at the bottom of your screen. Today's conversation will be with artists Lennon and Natalia Lassalle-Morillo. And it will be facilitated by Genesis Báez. Following the 50-minute conversation, there will be a short Q&A session, and we invite you to submit all your questions via the Q&A function. The conversation, including the Q&A, will be recorded, so if you wish to remain anonymous, please submit your questions anonymously. Today's event is happening in conjunction with Joint Custody, which is an exhibition curated by Amanda Nudelman and featuring works across video and photography by Natalia Lassalle-Morillo and Lacey Lennon. This exhibition is only viewed through this Saturday, March 23rd. Before we transition into conversation, I'd like to introduce Amanda Nudelman, who is the creator of Joint Custody. Amanda Nudelman is a curator and writer based in the Bay Area. She was the closing exhibitions and public programs curator at McAway Foundation for the Arts, and previously held positions at the Cadiz, San Francisco, and Untitled Arts. She has curated exhibitions and programs at the Vares Institute, eFlux, Royal Non-Such Gallery, Swiss Next, and Headlands Center for the Arts. Her writing has appeared in Creative Villages Journal, CSPA Quarterly, and Blackout Magazine. She holds a Master's of Arts in Curatorial Practice from California College of the Arts in San Francisco. And with that, I'll turn over the conversation to Amanda. Hi, Amanda. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thanks, Anna. I'm so happy to be here and to bring this group together in conjunction with the exhibition Joint Custody. Just going to give a brief introduction to the exhibition for anyone who hasn't been there or didn't read about it online. And then I will introduce each of our participants today and then hand it over to get the conversation started. So as Anna mentioned, Joint Custody features the works of two artists, Lacey and Natalia, and it centers frameworks of performance as tools to examine or re-examine personal histories. And the artists use the relational mechanics of collaborative performance, rehearsals, script writing, or film sets to explore how narratives evolve when they're shared, held, and revised between people. Working in lens-based mediums, their practices probe the ability of film and photography to capture multiple simultaneous perspectives of a single moment by blurring the boundaries of documentary, documentation, and performance. Their works operate at the seams of fiction and reality, where stories slip between memory and image. And that brings us to our program today, which invites Natalia and Lacey into conversation, as Anna mentioned, with artist Genesis Báez. And she's actually a mutual friend of both Natalia and Lacey, but none of them knew it until Natalia and Lacey were brought together for this exhibition, which is so wonderful. And that discovery sort of prompted bringing them together for this conversation. So together, they're going to be thinking about the process of rehearsal, the camera as a transformational tool, and how their relationships with their subjects, collaborators, and viewers inform their practices. I've had the pleasure of, being part of some of the preparation conversation, and it's just really good stuff. I'm really excited. And I'm pleased to introduce all of them today, starting with Natalia Lassalle-Morillo, who develops film, installation, and theater-based projects that reconstruct history and memory through a transdisciplinary and collaborative approach, merging theatrical performance, experimental ethnography, and collaborations with non-professional performers. Her work focuses on the excavation of history, both imagined and documented, decentralizing canonical narratives, and revising history through reenactments and the creation of new mythologies. Her work has been presented at Amont Foundation, Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de Puerto Rico, the Smithsonian, among many other venues internationally. She was a Smithsonian Artist Fellow and was recently awarded the Princeton Centro Bridging the Divides Fellowship. She developed her practice nomadically, but is currently based in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Lacey Lennon is an artist working in photography, performance, and video, and has exhibited her work at the Brown Fine Arts Center Orsman Gallery at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, Weber Gallery in Los Angeles, and the Museum of Contemporary Photography, Chicago, among others. Her work has been featured in publications such as Art Forum, LA Times Image, and Frieze Magazine. She holds an MFA from the Yale School of Art Photography program, which is where she met Genesis. She is assistant professor of photography at California State University, Long Beach, and a critic in the graduate photography program at the Yale School of Art. Lennon lives and works between Los Angeles and Oakland, California. And Genesis Báez is an artist based in New York, working predominantly in photography. She's recently exhibited her work at the Whitney Museum of American Art, Huxley Parlor in London, Ballroom Marfa, among others. Báez is the 2022 Capricious Photo Award recipient, and her works are held in the permanent collections of the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and Detroit Institute of Art and Yale University Art Gallery. And she currently teaches at Williams College. With that introduction, I'm happy to invite the three of them on to get into the meat of this conversation. So excited all three of you are here, and happy to turn my camera off and hand it over to you. So everyone please enjoy, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Lacey, and thank you everyone here present. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to start with some images of the exhibition. Okay. So what we see here are Lacey's works on the left, photographs framed on the wall, and on the right, we see parts of Natalia's video installation, kind of circling the space. And we're going to start with a clip of Natalia's piece, Retiro.
¿Qué tipo de película tú querías hacer?
Una película sencilla. Pues una historia que fue trascendental porque ocurrió y me desvió de lo que yo tenía, el imaginario que yo tenía de lo que iba a ser mi vida cuando yo fuera grande.
Y en cuanto a castearme a mí, ¿cuál fue la decisión detrás de eso?
Bueno, porque eres la actriz que puede mejor desempeñarme en términos de apariencia física y en términos de que tienes cualidades, ¿no? Que son un reflejo de lo que yo soy. Por ejemplo, una de las cosas que yo he descubierto en mi proceso de vida es que me estoy convirtiendo en mi madre. Pues yo le tenía miedo al futuro, a lo desconocido, a lo que pudiera pasar. Me preguntaba, Dios mío, ¿qué será ahora de mi vida? Tener que regresar a casa de papi y mami, como cuando era chiquita. y con esta carga encima de tener un divorcio a cuesta, tan joven, a los 21 años, y tenía desconfianza en que a lo mejor yo iba a flaquear, iba a volver con él, y que después que mis padres me dieron la oportunidad de regresar, como quien dice, me recogieron, yo fallarle. Ellos me perdonaban de que yo me hubiera casado con ellos en contra. Como me dijo mi papá, aquí no ha pasado nada. Aquí no ha pasado nada, todo va a ser como antes.
¿Qué tipo de película tú querías hacer?
Una película sencilla.
So I wanted to enter the conversation first discussing rehearsal, because rehearsal is important to how you both build photographs and video works. Could you each talk about where in the art making process does rehearsal happen? Like, what does it look like? And also, has it informed how you move through the unknowns of art making?
I'll jump in since you just saw a clip of Retiro, and then I'll pass it on to Lacey and we can go back and forth. I think first of all, hi everybody who I know and I don't know. And thank you once again, Amanda, for bringing Lacey, Genesis, and I together. It's an absolute dream. But I think, I mean, I'm excited to have this conversation because I seldom meet another artist who's interested in rehearsal, even though Lacey works with it in a different way than I do, but there's definitely intersecting points. For me, rehearsal, I think, is the genesis of where my work begins. Even though Retiro, is a multi-channel video work, and a lot of the works that I've been producing the last couple of years are not live, are our video image-based, moving image-based work. The root of my practice really is theater. I was trained in theater for, I want to say, over 15 years of my life. So I am very much, I even think that I'm consistently, I'm a theater maker that makes video in many ways. I'm always gathering and kind of going back to the way that theater creates a space for collaboration. And I think, to your question about the unknown, I think theater for me, or the process of creating device theater, is a process built to navigate the unknown in many ways, because it's a group of human beings coming together in order to figure out ways and alternatives, figure out together how to work together, no? So I think for me, rehearsal really is a site for possibility, and I think when it's brought into a space of creating moving images, it's really, for me, kind of a site where I can facilitate communion between my collaborators, but also kind of be a witness to what can happen when you prompt different circumstances. I think for, I don't know if, am I getting cut off? I see Genesis, and do you hear me well? Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, you're good. I think my relationship to rehearsal has also shifted over time. And I think the piece that we're talking about and looking at today, Retiro, is a piece that I developed in collaboration with my mother, Gloria. And it was a piece that was born of the act or from the act of rehearsing together. I think the piece really emerged from after my grandmother's passing. And I think after her passing, I moved into my mother's home, just out of an impulse of feeling like I needed to accompany my mother in the death of her origin, of her mother. And we didn't really get along. So in a way, we would, I started facilitating these gathering moments in different moments of our day, where we would discuss and have conversations around her process of grief, have conversations around how she felt as a woman in her mid-60s, and what her desires were, for her future as a woman. And I think through that, we started writing and coming up with this film, or I prompted her, or kind of, prompted her, proposed to her to create a film, based on these memories of her life. So that entire film and the script that led to that film was facilitated to a process of us rehearsing different ideas together. Then there was a shift in the process where we were transitioning into filming the actual film. And then because my mom is really not a film director, and because the entire process was me really imagining what would happen if my mom were given the space and the resources to become a film director, rehearsal was the way for us to figure out how to create a relationship, or a creative relationship between one another, as me, as this facilitator, or as this artist who is working with her mother and performing her in these early stages of her youth or of her young adulthood. But then there's a process of my mother rehearsing how to direct me, throughout the course of this film. So it's fascinating. I know later on we're going to talk about camera and how we relate to the camera, but in a way, the camera in this work and in most recent works that I've been developing with collaborators or co-creating collaboratively, the camera becomes a witness to that rehearsal. And even though the camera does become the access point and we're rehearsing for the camera at point in times, I want to say that in Retiro, the camera really did become a witness to this phenomena of us trying to figure out how to collaborate, trying to figure out how to create this fiction out of the reality of us, trying to tell different versions of this same story, which is this transcendental story in my mother's life. Yeah, I can keep talking about it, but I want to give space for Lacey to talk, and maybe there's a back and forth that can emerge from what she has to say.
Yeah, I think, when you were talking, Natalia, I was thinking a lot about how you were talking about this idea of integrating your mom into the script in such a way where you really built it around her. In a lot of ways, I kind of work with that, like in a really similar way with the actors that I work with. So much of it is about meeting them or finding them, or sort of beginning with like an idea for a script, or like beginning with a kind of kernel of an idea, like a premise or a prompt or a poem in a way, and building it around them. So much of it is about this kind of exchange. I mean, my photographs in general, like, when you're looking at them, the images of people, like they are of, dynamics unfolding between people. And I think rehearsal does this really amazing thing in my work where it kind of allows me to try out all of these different possible inputs, and these different ways of thinking about making an image, and photographing through rehearsal, and getting out something on the other end that perhaps maybe didn't even look like what we were doing while we were in the midst of rehearsal and whatnot. You know, it's really you know, I kind of like I build these plays and these performances and these premises really as a guide for us to, in a sense, get to this other place, like a place that I could not have otherwise thought up. This photograph, if you can go to the previous one, it's these are both of this performer. Her name is Quinn, and this was like it was like one of the it was a complicated shoot, but it was it was it sort of I came to her with the script and I was really taken by this performer. And I wanted her to sort of enact this piece about this young mother who was having this conversation with her child, and they were kind of going back and forth, and the conversation was transgressive at moments. And I think that Quinn really responded in such a way where she was thinking about her own mother and her relationship with her, and outpoured so much more of Quinn's experience than perhaps maybe I had initially planned for or even thought. And, she really sort of took it and interpreted it. And there was this way that, when we were working together, that like I really had to kind of relinquish to a certain degree a lot of control on my part and just allow for things to unfold. And that's what I kind of mean by like the script sort of functioning as a guide through rehearsal to sort of get us to this other place that I couldn't have sort of dreamed up or even thought up. But that a situation sort of presented itself to me and I made an image in the moment with her and in that way. And, this is one photograph, and then the next image is of her sort of doing another sort of gesture or thing. But we really sort of just moved through different gestures, and she was sort of telling me these different stories and sort of interpreting the performance. And when we're working, we're sort of outside and there's maybe people passing by and people onlookers, and some are maybe, in some way like an audience to a certain degree. And then they might move on. But when we're outside and we're working on it, it's really just this sort of recurring rehearsal that loops and loops and loops, and images sort of emerge out of that.
Lacey, I have a quick question for you on that note. Where do your scripts come from? Like what are you pulling from when you're making these?
They come from light. They come from my experiences. They come from my family. They come from me. They come from my relationship. They come from my personal history. They come from other people's stories, things I've been told. They very much are a sort of amalgamation of a few different things at once. Yeah, and oftentimes the characters are, the way that I see them are just different versions of the same self sometimes. And in this case with Quinn's, there were sort of multiple sort of selves or multiple versions of the same self.
That's really interesting because this brings up this idea of interpretation and like translation that I see happening in both of your works. With you, Lacey, it's starting with a script that you write that comes from life, right? So it's like you're interpreting through the writing and the rearranging of that writing into a script. And there's the physical interpretation through the actor, through their body, right? Like of gesture. And then there's the interpretation of the camera, right? Like all of that continues to be refracted as it moves through all of these different kind of languages or modes of expression. So that kind of takes me to my next question, which is about the camera. So although rehearsal is such an important part of how you each make the works, right? Like it's like baked into the work. What meets us in the world are actually images, right? Whether they're moving or still. Could you talk about how you use the camera or how you're thinking about the camera and what you feel it facilitates or makes possible? And yeah, this idea of rehearsal translating and refracting through the camera.
I can jump in, but I also want to make a comment to something Lacey said about letting go. Know that there's an aspect too of rehearsal for me that has to do with kind of, people talk about dismantling a hierarchy, but I think when you're collaborating with people, and especially I usually collaborate with human beings who are not trained performers, but who are artists in their own right. There is an aspect of the practice that, of course, is diving into the unknown, but also a process of letting go. And I think rehearsal, through the process of repeating and doing over and over and over again, there's a relationship that is born between myself and my collaborators, or that is sustained over time. But there's also a letting go of control, which I think is, I mean, I was trained in a school of directing, in a school of directing where the director has absolute control and makes all the decisions. And I think since going through that process, I've been in my own process of unlearning what it's like to have control. And going to your question about the camera, I mentioned earlier that the camera becomes a witness. But Genesis and I had this conversation because I'm not a trained image maker. I never went to film school. I've never taken a film class. I mean, I maybe took an editing class when I was 18 or 19 years old, but my entire process of learning how to be in dialogue with a camera, I think, is much more influenced by my experience as a dancer and as a performer, than it is from the mind of a photographer, even though of course there's an aspect, I'm thinking constantly about composition and light and texture and feeling, and humidity and heat. Like all of these are all questions that I'm thinking about when I'm creating an image. But for me, my relationship to the camera in all of my work, not only Retiro, is of how my body is relating to the object of the camera as an object that is seeing what's happening, whether it be a rehearsal or a scene. And there's very little staging that I do when I am filming. I think it's really about my body becoming this tripod at many moments in time, and kind of also working with the intimacy that I'm building with my collaborators. I think it's fascinating for me too, because when speaking about Retiro, Retiro is a project that I developed with my mom over a very long period of time. I even forget how many years we were working on it, but it was, we started in 2014, and I finished the first cut of the film in 2019. So the camera, in a way, it was through this process that I really learned how to use the camera technically. It was through this process that I learned how to also work with somebody who was extremely aware of a camera. And my relationship to it was, how do I work with this camera so that it can become a transmitter between you and I? So that it doesn't become this intimidating, this menacing, capturing, object, but something that is allowing for our relationship to evolve. And I wanted to go back to, I mean, I can talk about this image in particular because I've been thinking, Genesis, about what you said over the weekend. Because I was being a little like, I don't know anything about the camera, and Genesis was like, of course you do. You work with a camera. And I I began to sort of revisit these images that are in Retiro that, in a way, are witnessing a rehearsal of some capacity. And it's the scene where my mother is swimming underwater, and it was very difficult to film. But Genesis made this comment of how, the fact that my mom was underwater made her seem like she was in a womb, which, of course, for me feels I mean, it's a beautiful metaphor, but of course, I am her daughter. I was once in her womb, swimming in her waters. So I don't know, that metaphor kind of made me, I just found it really beautiful. And that's something that was facilitated by the camera itself. But then I wanted to go to the other image that I think follows these underwater images. That, I mean, this one in particular, because Genesis, when you first posed the question about the camera, I think if you go back for a second to the previous one, I started thinking of how my relationship to the camera continuously is one of, how do I put it into words? Like, I mean, in this image, for example, you see my mother, and this was this extensive interview that I was doing with my mother in her backyard. But you see me in the corner, kind of coming in and out. And I think it kind of speaks to the fact that when I am working with a camera, I am not only camera woman, I am also interviewee. At times I have to become the performer. At times I have to facilitate the entire orchestration of the shoot. So there is something too of allowing the camera to capture what it needs to capture of this rehearsal that's taking place. And it isn't until the process of editing that I'm really able to understand how I'm relating to the camera. But I think, and I think the last thing I wanted to say in relationship to the camera is that I feel, going back to this idea of rehearsal, I constantly think of rehearsal or orchestrating or writing a script or bringing people together to enact a circumstance as a way of, facilitating a phenomena. I'm not directing a phenomena, I'm not directing it. I'm literally just kind of creating the conditions for people to be free. And then I become a witness to that and kind of then become a mirror and reflect what they're doing. And, that's when I think the act of directing begins for me. But I recently, I mean, a couple of years ago, I came across this beautiful text by Beatriz Santiago Muñoz, where she talks about the camera being this ritual object. And of course, I admire Bea, and I love her work, but it was fascinating to also read that text because I think it also speaks to the way that I see the camera in the act of capturing an image. It becomes this object that is witnessing this ritual, and it becomes part of the ritual in many ways, because the camera for me is never static. I'm constantly moving around the rehearsal, moving around the action, moving around the scene, and trying to find different ways of spectating it or witnessing it.
Yeah, I mean, because one of the things I really am drawn to is how you make yourself present through the movement of the camera, right? Like, these aren't static, or they're not all static shots that kind of mimic sitting in a chair in a theater looking at a stage where I can't really move, but everything is kind of, like the what is it? Like the horizon isn't moving, but like everything around it is. And so, yeah, when I think about your use of the camera, I think of your presence amongst many other things, and it almost feels like an extension of your body as well, and another place where you get to be really intuitive. It sounds like the rehearsal space and process facilitates a lot of chance, right? And it invites a lot of listening to the things that are kind of emerging and presenting themselves to you. And it feels like working with the camera and like moving through space around something also kind of facilitates a certain type of, intuition work. Yeah, Lacey, I'm curious, what about Because the images we've been talking about here are moving images, and curious how you think of photography.
Yeah, I think, when Natalia was talking about like the idea of choreography, like that really resonates with me. Can you go to Cool Earth Spirits, the shadow in the center? Yeah, that one. That really resonates, I think, with me in terms of like being with the camera and like showing up in this sort of rehearsal space, or the sort of space that I'm creating with the performers, or the people who I'm working with. In a lot of ways I set up there is chance to a certain degree, but I feel like with photography, like, you know, um that's kind of like the sort of tenet, like central tenet of it, that like I'm not certain like what is going to come out in the photograph, or it's always sort of this thing which is new information to me, this thing that I made, and like setting up the parameter, like, and me showing up with my camera, so setting up the parameter for the performers to sort of be in and to express themselves in, and me having a camera, like working with them. It's very physical. It's like it's very physical. We're sort of in this sort of almost dance of energy in a way, working and thinking and feeling and communicating, not on this sort of like this verbal register, but really sort of communicating on this other register of energy, and kind of call and response through action and gesture and lines and directions that requires just like such a focus, and requires me to sort of like not be on the phone, not be looking at anything other than what's sort of unfolding. And I like that there is an elimination of information. I don't think that everything from the rehearsal or the play, like the performance or whatever it is that I give a performer, needs to make it into like how a viewer experiences my work, or the exact details. Like it's the photograph that like sort of produces a bit of everything in it, that like is something that I want to leave with someone to experience and to view. And like this image in particular, Cool Earth Spirits, like we had been working for hours and sort of maneuvering one another, and trying out different things, like physically sort of expressing through the body at a certain point. This premise, this play that sort of set up these photographs, is like adjacent to, or was like another version of this overarching play from the photographs previously shown with Quinn. It's very related, but it was different. And yeah, like my participation in it is, again, just like, I am also a part, like participating in this dynamic. And I am, again, with the camera, just like waiting for something to kind of like to make an image of something that like I think just exceeds my expectations. The camera is sort of like helps in doing that, or is this sort of second set of eyes that allows me to see something anew. Yeah, I see it as like, I don't know, just this other device that helps me to kind of see a circumstance or a scenario. And oftentimes going through images, like there are things that I did not understand about the play or the performance or even myself, that is sort of visible in the image, that then helps me understand why I started the whole thing to begin with.
And I'm just thinking too that there's this other kind of layer of translation that happens from color to black and white, right? Or are you making these with black and white film?
No, these are all, I mean, a lot of these are digital and a lot of it's always like, you know, I'm shooting often in black and white, but it's always like a digital color file too.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some color film too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wanted
Yeah,
to
because
make a
it's like the
comment
black.
to what Lacey.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, that I was just gonna say that the black and white just creates a whole new set of relationships like between shapes and textures that just like didn't exist, right? Like
Mhm.
seeing it in color, like being there in front of it, right? That like we change something when we photograph it, or things look differently when we take a picture of it.
Mhm.
Natalia.
Sorry to interrupt. I wanted to make a comment to what Lacey said of having, you know, of having to be hyper present. You know, there's this level of having, you know, even though and of the act of using this camera and holding this rehearsal and facilitating these encounters, also being one that requires you to be, I think in the world that we live in where we're on our phones all the time and receiving so much imagery and information, for me, it's a moment where I can only be present in that space and time. In order to orchestrate what's going on. And that is something that for me is very, it's como te digo, it's something that's so connected for me to the act of witnessing theater or performing. Because in the act of performing, there's no way that I can be, you know, if I'm editing, of course I can pick up, you know, I can pick up my phone and get distracted, but there's something of facilitating these, you know, these rehearsals and capturing these images that require a certain level of focus and attention. Because there's also, and this is something that I'm thinking through, that I think maybe speaks to what we're going to talk about, that has to do more with installation, if we ever get to talk to this in this conversation. But I'm always thinking about what exists outside the frame that was present in the moment of capturing the image, right? And that which is not in the frame manifests in the frame in other ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, which actually leads us to the next thing that we've been discussing, right, with your works. Um, um, which is that importantly, the works emerge from exchanges, right, and relationships with people, and sometimes over extended periods of time. So could you guys talk about the relational component of the work? Who are the people in the works? What's your process like working together? Kind of walk us through that. And also another point is that once an image is out in the world, it also has a relationship to people, space, and other images, for example, an installation. Um, Lacey, did you want to start with a line in the sand?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think I don't know. It's interesting to think about like people with this photograph because I can think of like three people that Roya, her name is Roya, like reminded me of and why I kind of casted her. And I mean, there's just something very special about her spirit. And so much of casting and working with people and selecting people to be in my work is, you know, kind of it's sort of based on just a feeling, intuitive feeling and like their spirit. Um, I feel like, you know, when I think about this photograph, I feel like I've made other versions of this, or I have been attempting to make versions of this for a while. And um, there's something about making a picture like 3 years ago and it not landing or not being, you know, that good. And then meeting another person that reminds me of a photograph that I made. And I'm like, I can make a better version with this person and, you know, I think I've made like two versions of this picture before. Um, actually arriving at this image. And in some ways it's about finding people and relating to them, and or me changing and knowing what me changing and growing and knowing what I need in a relationship with an actor or a performer. And so that sort of like helping to propel a picture along. And also, I don't know, just also thinking about people, these people are cast based on, memories and people who are important in my life. And people who might have, taught me something, or who have sort of provoked something in me.
Mhm.
This image as well. I've worked with this actor a few times, and unlike Roya, I only worked with Roya that one time. But this is another actor who I've worked with several times, and over several months we made different photographs. And I think that there's this ability in my work where if I don't get it in a photograph, or with a particular idea for an image, then there's always this ability to be able to go back and remake it, or to try again, or to like reattempt kind of over and over. And this was like, I think, the third attempt at making something with this performer, Ria, Roya and Ria, with Ria.
Lacey, what do you think you found? Like when you made this picture and you were like, I found it after all of these different times.
Well,
like
I
what
don't even know. Yeah, like when I made this photograph, I didn't actually think that I had it, or like that I wasn't drawn to it at first.
Mm,
But I think that there were some things that happened in my life that made me see it differently. And that's also something that happens with photography. Like I might make it and I might not see it for 6 months or something, or 3 months. And then something occurs in my life and I'm editing and I'm looking through images, and the image comes back to me
right.
in a way that I hadn't, and I see it very differently, or I understand it differently because I've changed. The people around me have changed.
Mm,
When I see this like image, I know the sort of different people that I've sort of like amalgamated into this person, this figure. And uh on this particular day, in this particular, on this particular street in California, like they sort of converged for me. And out of that, I made something which, I can look at and know that it expresses something within me very deep and important, that needs to sort of come out. And so I think that's how I know maybe when also a photograph is right, or when it's ready to.
mm, mhm. Natalia, can I show a few seconds of your clip, or was there something you wanted to share ahead of time?
I mean, I think I can speak, and maybe you can show it in mute, because I feel we're in the role of speaking. But I think it's good to kind of have an image to give context. And I mean, I think for me, it was great to hear you, Lacey, because I think similarly, when I am working with people, I am building a relationship too with their spirits and their souls. I feel that there's something that I'm seeking within myself that I am seeing mirrored back to me. And even though I'm working with a camera, and even though I am working with performance, I usually think that my real medium is collaborative intimacy, and there's a lot of time and effort and intention and invisible work that goes into building these relationships over a really long period of time. And, you know, with my mom, I worked for almost 5 years and, you know, more like 6. I mean, I still work with her. So I've been working with her for a really, really long time. And that relationship with her has changed. And I think what is being created, or what the images that result, or the projects that result, are because we're positioned in different moments in our lives, and that becomes influential into every aspect of creating. But I think most recently, you know, in the project that I've been developing over the last 5 years, it's very, you know, even before I bring out a camera, there's months of conversation and exchange and sharing time with people. Especially because they're people who are not used to being in front of a camera. So there has to be a certain level of intuitive awareness of each other, but also I'm also have to be very patient and empathetic, and there's a lot of negotiation. So at the end of the day, the most important thing is not my image. The most important thing is not what I'm making. The most important thing is protecting the relationship that I'm building with this person. So there's even instances where I am intending, and I think Genesis, we can pause the video, I think. But you know, I think, thank you. I think there's instances too in these meetings or in these moments where I summon somebody to rehearse or film or shoot, and then I realize, actually, no, the camera needs to be put away, because today's not a day to work with a camera. Today's a day to build this relationship. And what results, you know, whether it's a film or a video, it's a result of these gatherings for me. So I feel that relationships, the relationship building takes precedence for me, from the work of being a director or being a person who captures images. The image and the film is a result of the relationship, and it, I think, reflects the investment in the relationship, if that makes sense. Because it, you know, I'm always thinking too of how when I'm collaborating with people, it's also like building a family in some way, you know?
It's
So
kind of impossible. Oh, I was just gonna say, it's kind of impossible to make anything without, you know, a certain kind of intimacy, without investing in that relationship with the people who show up in your work. It really requires like that. I mean, that's also the energetic material of photography, like, and video making, that, like, you know, there is, like, you know, in other mediums, like there's paper and there's canvas and there's these different physical things, but, like, you know, with photography, it's more quantum in that way. And the care that is put into a dynamic with someone, in talking to them and understanding, is, you know, can entirely change how someone shows up to perform or to be in the work. And what you put into it, what you give off, what you give, is like, is what you get back. It's also a kind of reflection, I think, of you, the capacity or space that people feel like they can take up in your work. And, you know, what you're saying about trust, like, is just, it's so, I mean, trust is half of what I feel like I do. Trust, but also really going for and working with people, performers that like really want to be there and really see value in the ideas and the piece that is at hand. And people will let you know. People will be very explicit in what they want to give to the work too.
One shape that I think of when I think of both of your works, and this idea of relating, and like where these interpersonal relationships kind of come up in the work. The shape I see is is echo. The other night I was soaking in your work. I rewatched Retiro for the 1000th time. What a pleasure. I was soaking in Lacey's photographs as well. And afterwards, I noticed that something in me had kind of shifted, and I was starting to see in my environment like echoes and patterns, echoes. I just kept kind of, I don't know, there's something changed in my mind after seeing these works. Um, something kind of magical there. But I started to journal about this idea of echo and how there are like these what is echoing between generations in some of the works, specifically in Natalia, Tu con Gloria, the what's echoing between timelines, personal timelines, kind of larger historical, collective, political timelines. And same with you, Lacey. And like these spaces in between, like people or generations, the liminality in between there. It was really interesting, really exciting. And I'm curious if, like, on that note, if you guys could also speak about installation and like the physical presence of this work and how you think it's like what are some of the things you see it doing um as an object that we encounter in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that like I want people to see like I mean for me it's like the relationships between the images are so important, and like what one image makes me think of and how I make multiple versions of an image or make drafts or remake images to get better versions of them. Like when I'm looking at this like installation shot, it's like so much of it is about like setting up a series of relationships and giving space to those relationships to be seen.
Right.
Like I want people not like, I think photography is challenging because sometimes photography is so close to like writing or seeing a document, and like stepping up to an image can at times feel like you're reading something very intricate, and like there are a lot of words, and it's similar to writing in that way where you're working with what's already out there in the world with you're sort of creating frames of what is already existing as opposed to like purely working from an imagined space. And like I want there to be a viewing experience of my work where you're sort of surrounded almost, or you're sort of in a suite of images and made to look and move around without maybe being bombarded or having too much information to sort of read or to look at. Like I want there's to be a lot of space to see an image and for you to be able to see multiples at once.
Yeah, and the relationship of our body to the piece. If it's smaller, I'm pulled in. If it's larger, I need to step further back, right? This kind of choreography in a way of the body through the space because of the scale of the pieces and also the prints, right? Like there's just simply information that does not translate into pixels in a Zoom conversation, right? That you see in the prints, right? Like the image all the way here on the left, how we see all of this incredible texture in the shadow of the body there that almost just looks like this crazy landscape in the shadow of the body. Like that is only really like possible because of the physical form, the print at that size, and the way that you choose to print too, which is very intentional as well, right? You do with the shadows and yeah, and then yeah, Natalia, I'm so curious to how you're thinking, any thoughts around that, especially as like a 3-channel installation. I'm gonna jump to the pic as we wrap up. I'm just gonna jump to the first install image.
See, no, I mean, it's interesting because I feel, for me, the work, the process of making an image or creating an image happens many times. Now it happens when you're thinking about it, it happens when you film it, it happens when you edit it. And, because I'm also working with narrative, even though it's non-linear narrative, but it's kind of like an extended narrative that is woven through the process, a very tedious process of editing. And then there's the installation, which for me, I think installation is the moment that I think the theatrical comes in. For me, it really becomes about staging the film for a physical experience. I work usually with multi-channel film, and the Retiro is a multi-channel film. So I'm constantly thinking of creating the conditions for you to witness multiple things happening at the same time. And it is about multiplicity. It is about seeing the spectator having to make decisions as a spectator as to what you are drawn to. And this installation is different. I mean, I thank Amanda because she kind of put me in a position where I had to reconsider. This is my first time using screens. I usually use projection. And usually in projection, the screens are never next to each other. So the spectator really needs to move around the space and really has to kind of surrender to the fact that you're not going to see everything at once. And even if even if the screens are together, usually there's 2 and 2. It's very difficult to see the 3. So this is different because I think this is the closest that I've ever had screens to each other, and the closest that it has been to sort of seeing a triptych of this film, aside from seeing, the mock-up the online mock-up to seeing the film. But I still do think that with this particular installation, it's still, at least that's what I'm interested in, which is you as a spectator have to negotiate what you want to see. There's a process of live editing that takes place, right? Because you are looking at an image and then looking at another image that is continuous within the same, narrative. So, and then I think with installation, I think it goes back to what I was saying of allowing that which isn't in the frame to be present in the installation space. No, I think for this, I was thinking about the house that I grew up, which was this color. And I was also really thinking about a communal space for people to sit together to witness, which makes me think of Lassalle-Morillo, my mom's living room as a gathering space as well, where we used to sit and watch TV. So watching TV, but it's a different.
And we're never seeing the same thing twice, right? I think that that's one of the things that really excites me, right? In regards to this idea of multiplicity, like even though they're kind of close to each other, I can't actually see all 3 screens at once, right? So I'm seeing it anew each time I see it or press play, even with the mock-up. And that goes, I think, for the entire exhibition, depending on where you're standing in space, right? Depending on the relation of my body, right? Like the spectator. All of these different relationships are generated, right? Because images are constantly gaining and change and losing and shifting meaning depending on their context. So I feel like every time I see this documentation, I'm in New York, I can't see the show in person, I'm so sad, but every time I see this documentation, I feel like I pick up on new things, new knowledge that is kind of generated from these, kind of ongoing relations between images. So I feel like we could go on forever, but I wanted to shift it over to the Q&A. Thank you so much so far, Natalia and Lacey. And let's see, one moment here. Are there any questions? I don't see anything in the Q&A right now.
Amanda, there's a question on the chat, actually.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Okay, we have one question here. It reads, both of you return to the same works to reinterpret and re-edit, often over periods of several years. What draws you back to rewriting the narratives of the work?
I change. I change. I'm different. I am my life is very different. I mean, even just thinking about when I made some of this work that's in the show, the last photograph that I made was the landscape passing shadow and
Oh,
the
let me
be
go to that. Hold on, because we
oh,
need
you don't have to
to.
go to it. You don't have to go all the way over to it, but I just,
Oh, it's so good though. It's so good. Let's look at that picture. All of us together.
um yeah, I think life just changes. Life dictates, I think, a lot of how I see my work very differently over a period of time. And there were also pictures that I feel like in the show that I wrote off, that I didn't was not interested in as works. And someone will say something to me about a photograph, and I might be like, oh wow, really? Or like there's just something that I did not see. And so I think it has always taken me a very long time to really be able to read and see my work. And then also coupled with changing as a person and the narrative changing or shifting, and that dictates at any given moment the kind of edit or working body of works that feels like it's representative. And when going in to make a selection for this show, it really was about just pulling things together that represented me at that particular moment, or that were expressive of where I was at in my life, and in my art practice at that particular moment, and also responding to feelings of being in the world at that time too.
Mhm. Lacey, do you feel like you spend time between, like there's like time goes by between when you photograph and when you actually start looking and reading the image? And like does that time allow for you to kind of let go of whatever expectations you had for the picture in the beginning and then like just read the image for what it is?
Yeah, it just allows me to see. Yeah, I think that is a letting go of expectations,
Yeah.
but it's also like a picture. I think takes a long time to sort of reveal itself, like, or show itself, and missing details that I didn't see in the first few passes of looking at it, and then needing to make a proof of it, making a print of it myself, and then versus making a proof of it with Hayward Hart, who is at technical support in Los Angeles, who is my printer and who works very closely with me to make these works, like, and because then we work on the tones, and then there are elements which become clear about the photograph. I might not have even seen a whole section of an area of the photograph, and then Hayward and I are working on it, and it's different, and the proof is made, and then the exhibition print is made, and I see differences of these works change as we work on the physical print too. So yeah, it's just kind of constantly shifting how I see them.
Right.
I mean, I can speak to it briefly. Are you there, Genesis? Am I skipping? Am I
Yep.
good? Okay. No, I mean,
No,
I
you're
think
good.
I think what Lacey says also resonates with me. I think the revisitation has to do with the fact that my relationship to the work changes over time. It's fascinating because I think with Retiro, I think I did like 3 versions of it before settling on a version that felt right. And it literally was an act of sanity for myself because I could have re-edited that film for decades. But there was a moment that I had to sort of just be like, okay, no, I have to stop. this is insane. A hard
the
drive crashed.
breaks.
I can't do this anymore. And but it's fascinating because I do think that then there's this other process of revisiting and coming back to something that that manifests in different ways in my work. Like, I think I'm continuously working with my mother in different ways, right? And that changes over time. And even though it's not the same piece, it is, you know, we are repeating the same ideas, but in different ways because we're in different moments. And, you know, I've been working with the myth of Antigone for almost 6 years. And I think right now I'm working on my third version of really trying to figure out how to engage with the work. So it really is, I think, for me, an attempt of entering a phenomena that I'm fascinated with through different and poking it from all different directions. It's like exhausting my obsession with something until I think I've
Right,
reached a point. Mhm.
right, right. Yeah, and
Mhm.
again, the work is always revealing new things to you, right? Like the more you engage with it, the more you revisit something. And like the Clarice Lispector quote that we were discussing earlier or the other day about art happening sideways, right? That like when we revisit something, we may pick up on something that we didn't intend or could see, you know, in the first place. So it feels like a really generative process. Does anyone else have any questions? Do we have questions from folks here? Oh, this is fantastic. I'll read the question. Hi, all. Thank you so much for this convo. I love that what was said about the medium of intimacy living at the core of both of your processes. I'm wondering, I guess specifically in Natalia's case, how working with what seems like a crew might enter with the intimacy and how you attain that intimacy. I think it's a great question, Baban.
It's a great,
Yep.
thank you, Tova. It's a great question. It's, you know, it's fascinating because I think,
And for Lacey, just
let me see, am I skipping? I feel like I'm skipping so much. I hope that I'm not. But no, I think that's a really,
you're good now. You're good now.
you're good? Okay. It's a good question because I think that's the reason why I have, you know, I have really that has led me to not work with production models that seem unruly. I usually don't work with big crews. And if I need to work with other collaborators, it's also collaborations that have been steeped over a long period of time. So in a similar way, I usually work with the performers or the people who I am creating the work with, I think, who are the core of the work, for weeks before bringing anything else. And then there are long periods of filming, because I do think that the first days of filming are really days where we are all trying to get accustomed to having new people in the space. But there is an aspect of working with a large group of people that, you know, the people that I'm bringing in are people that I'm very intimate with, that really understand the way that I work, but are also, there is a level of familial building that comes into working, which I think, like I said, is also inherited from my work in theater. Like when you're working in theater, you're sometimes rehearsing for 3 months with a group of people. So you come to a point where you love each other, where you develop intimacies, but there's also a moment where you're all gonna hate each other. So that all kind of becomes instrumental in the way that we're collaborating. But I think the answer to that is you know, there's also I think in the way that I work, a rejection of these production models. Like, I don't believe in having 16-hour shoots. I believe in working for 4 hours or 5 hours with a lot of breaks and kind of flowing, and then allowing the people that are working with me to really become intimate amongst each other. So the sound engineer becomes the friend of the performer at the end of the day. And up DP becomes person is a level.
Cutting out.
Oh, yep.
It cut out the last thing that you said, Natalia.
Oh, I think the last thing that I said, that there's a process of building intimacy beyond me, that they are building an intimacy between each other as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, are there any other questions from anyone out there? Or Lacey, do you have any additional thoughts?
No, I think like, I mean, intimacy is, is kind of, I kind of talked throughout, about intimacy and like that being really kind of central, especially as it relates to the performers, and just really, again, keeping with this idea of trust and making an image of someone and building that, and that being a constituent part of how the work gets made. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. One last announcement I'd like to make, that Natalia and her mother is actually going to be at Slash this Saturday for their in-person performance. So I would like everyone to, if you haven't seen the show already, to come and also see the performance that's happening this Saturday. It's the last day of the show. But thank you all so much again for being here, and thank you to the audience as well.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And